Welcome to Norse Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you so much for listening. Normally, this is where I would introduce our co-host and analyst, Arif of the Daily Norseman and various other blogs, but unfortunately we had some audio problems this week, and as a result, the episode that was hosted by Dusty is mostly going to end up in the garbage. Apologies for that. Dusty's audio is unlistenable at best, and while some may view that as an improvement, that's not necessarily something we want to present to the public. If you recall, in previous episodes, we have referred to Dusty's computer as both a terrorist, an anarchist, and a member of FIFA. However, we are going to move on, and Arif has done a nice little interview with the KP show. A fellow by the name of Kyle Posey, who works for the SBNation site for the San Diego Chargers. That site is Bolts from the Blue. His Twitter account is at @the_KP_show. Kyle Posey is his name. It's a very great guest, a very great interview. We will have a recap of the game that both Arif and I are going to be attending next week when we put our new episode out on Wednesday. So look out for that. But now, without any further delay, I would like to bring on both Arif and Kyle. Take it away, Arif.
Okay, and then also something that we tend to do is we try to establish our guests' credibility. So, who do you write for? What's your background covering the Chargers, or talking about the Chargers, or tweeting about the Chargers?
Yeah, so I write for BoltsFromTheBlue.com, it's one of SBNation's Chargers blog. I've been writing for them for a little over 2 years now. So you can find me on Twitter at @the_KP_show. Fire off the takes like everybody else, man.
Yeah, no, you've got a good account. I recommend anyone who's listening to the show follow _KP_show_, not underscore at the end of show. Sorry. A lot of good takes, a lot of good understanding of the way that football is played, not just from a schematic perspective, but also you bring your experience to the game. You've talked to a couple of coaches. It sounds like, and you also continue to stay updated on football by reading it. So it's not just hot takes; it's pretty good analysis. The thing that caught my eye, actually, the first thing I want to talk about has nothing to do with the upcoming Chargers-Vikings game, but a piece that you wrote a while back called "The Reason Teddy Bridgewater Struggles with His Deep Ball." It's a piece I've actually relied on a couple of times. I've pointed people to the piece about sort of the differences between the different kind of deep shots that Teddy Bridgewater takes, but walk me through what your conclusion was and how you kind of discovered it.
Yeah, so I wish I had the article up now, but just actually played high school quarterback, and I mean anybody who's thrown a ball would know this, but just watching Teddy in college, you can see that a lot of his deep balls, and the reason that they were like quote unquote underthrown was because these weren't his first reads. He was reading, in most offenses, you read the outside vertical, like the deep pass, and then you just come to your underneath route. Teddy was doing the opposite, and I wish I could remember the offensive coordinator's name, but he would go from shallow reads, and then he would just progress to the intermediate to the deep ball. So I felt like the reason that he was underthrowing passes because, I mean, it was like a last-minute thing, and then he would just have to kind of flick it out there.
And it's I think that was Bill Callahan, the offensive coordinator. I think he had some experience in Oakland. Actually, I could just pull the article up. It looks like that's what you said. Sean Watson is from the Bill Callahan tree.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That's it. Yeah. Okay, so I just wanted to throw that out there. It was a pretty good piece before the 2014 draft. We'll put it in the show notes so that anyone who's listening to the show can read about it. But let's talk a little bit about the matchup. Interesting note that Dusty pulled up from the Daily Norseman page. Do you know the San Diego Chargers and the Minnesota Vikings have never won consecutive games against each other?
Oh man! Well, here we go.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's gonna be important because the Chargers won their last matchup against the Vikings. I think that was with McNabb throwing all of 39 yards. You remember that game?
McNabb? Wow, I don't. That was a while ago.
Yeah, well, I mean, the Chargers and the Vikings haven't played each other all that often, which is not a huge surprise. But I think a lot of people remember a previous matchup between the Chargers and the Vikings in 2007. Where were you when you watched that game? Do you remember much of it?
Oh, I remember that. That's the game where Cromartie ran the long kick back and Peterson.
Oh, yeah, that did happen in that game too. But yeah, Peterson ran 296.
Peterson ran for about 500 yards. Yeah, I was just sitting on the couch watching the game with my dad. My dad's he's one of those diehard fans where they know enough about the game just to get mad at all like the small things. So they're like anything could go wrong. Like incomplete pass, he's throwing something at the TV. Missed tackle, he's cussing. That kind of fan.
It's probably a good thing that he wasn't a fan of the Vikings then. Well, let's get straight into the matchup. The Chargers have been having, it's only been 2 weeks, but I think the Chargers have been having a respectable year thus far. But, what are your impressions about the Chargers, coming out of these past 2 weeks?
Yeah, there's definitely been a lot of good things. And we obviously, with a common opponent, it was good to see just how the Vikings attacked or how they attacked the Lions and how they, on both sides of the ball, I guess, but you can definitely see that the passing game, they have weapons, that's for sure. So Stevie Johnson's been a very, very nice weapon. He's been the slot guy. I don't know if he's going to play this week because of concussion, but Ladarius Green's been almost everything that we thought he would be. So the middle of the field, they're definitely doing some work there. And then with the running backs, Danny Woodhead and Melvin Gordon, there's been a lot of positive just with those weapons there, and then not to mention Keenan Allen on the outside. As far as the line of scrimmage, if this was 7-on-7, the Chargers would probably be in the AFC Championship. But football is played in the trenches, and last week especially, they struggled. So DJ Fluker got hurt week 1, and that did not go so well last week. So the right guard, Chris Harrison, he had a pretty rough game against Geno Atkins. That
brings up some. Well, that's almost to be expected, but that brings up something interesting. The Chargers traded backup guard tackle Jeremiah Searles to the Vikings. Is there any sort of sense of regret among Chargers fans, or even maybe the Chargers FO about that trade?
Well, I think the thought process was, obviously you're not going to expect Fluker to get hurt the week 1.
Right.
I think the thought process was that Harrison would be able to just come in and be able to be the swing guy. I think they were more confident in his abilities to play tackle, and that's why they kept him around. But so I just based off what Football Outsiders tracks, I just track blown blocks on a week-to-week basis, and last week Harrison had 9 blown blocks. He gave up a half sack and created 3 penalties.
That's incredible.
So, that's about as poorly as you can play, and that wasn't just against Atkins. So I think Lionel Joseph is a guy who's going to be lined up against him for the majority of the game. So, and he had a pretty good game last week.
He did.
So go ahead.
Well, yeah. So I actually wanted to talk a little bit about how the Chargers are going to line up. They've lined up with 3 receivers on nearly every snap. I think, taking a look at these snap counts, 142 offensive snaps. Keenan Allen has played all of them. And then Malcolm Floyd and Stevie Johnson played 130. If Stevie Johnson isn't set to play, do you think they go to 2 wide receivers, or do you think they'll stick with a 3 wide receiver set?
Oh, well, so Ladarius Green is actually the one that is questionable at the moment because of concussion.
Sure.
So Stevie Johnson, as far as I'm concerned, as far as I know, he'll play. But yeah, I believe that's just the basis or what they want to do. They want to spread you out so they can still run in between the tackles, and then just get those quick passes, like quick hitting screens and quick crossers. So you're going to see a ton of 3 receiver sets for sure.
Yeah, and there's a big emphasis on you just mentioned crossers. A big emphasis on those crossing routes in the Chargers offense. Do you think that that's a good matchup against the Vikings?
I actually do. What I like that Detroit did a little bit is they got both running backs in the game, and The Chargers did that a little bit week 1, but we didn't see it much last week. So I would like to see Gordon and Woodhead in the backfield and try to get Woodhead in space and, just attack like Barr or Kendricks. That would be like the one area that I would try to attack this defense.
Sure, and then I think from a defensive perspective, the Vikings have a lot of really good talent. You mentioned Barr and Kendricks, people that I'm kind of high on. Thinking against Woodhead in space, even Kendricks is going to have a little bit of trouble. But what are the matchups that you're looking forward to? Against the Vikings defense, and then what are the matchups? I mean, you already mentioned Linval Joseph is probably going to be someone that you're a little bit worried about. Maybe someone else, probably also on the defensive line, that you could be worried about.
Yeah, great question. So the Chargers, just with a new right tackle, it's Joe Barksdale. He's fine, but he doesn't really he's not like a nasty kind of tackle. He's not like what's the Washington dude, like a Trent Williams, where he's just gonna put you into the dirt. So I was impressed by Robinson. I think it's 98, the defensive end. So
Brian Robinson, 96. He had an incredible game last week.
Yeah, that's the guy that I would definitely be worried about. But as far as matchups that I'd be just love to see, I'd love to see Harrison Smith on Ladarius Green. I don't know how often he's going to walk down and guard the tight end. I know he walked over the slot a couple times last week, or enough to where he was comfortable doing it. But that's definitely the one matchup that I would just love to watch because it's just two great athletes going at it.
Yeah, no, Harrison Smith's pretty incredible. And Ladarius Green, you mentioned that he's kind of who we thought he was. People follow the fantasy community on Twitter. They've been big fans of Ladarius Green, but he hasn't had a lot of opportunity because of Antonio Gates, who is now suspended, and he's still suspended going into this game. Has it always been optimism about Green for the Chargers or for Chargers fans? Has it been frustrating not seeing him play until this year? What's the deal with him?
Yeah, certainly frustrating. I think the difference between Green and some of the other Twitter heroes like a Christine Michael is Green has actually done it on the field. So once he's gotten his opportunities, he's sort of proven that he can't, guys just can't cover him. He's just too big and fast. He certainly doesn't have nuance in his game to a Gates would, but it just every opportunity he's gotten, he's made the most of it. So that's why it's been the most frustrating. And sure, he's certainly not, as complete as, some of the better tight ends in the league, like a Gronk, obviously. But, just put him on the field, and he's proven every, week in and week out that he can get yards for you. So, just a little, I think all of the fans have just been, a little curious, why wouldn't you maximize all of your weapons? And that just hasn't happened.
Okay, yeah, I think like you said, that's going to be an exciting game to watch, especially the matchup between Green and Smith. But I think it's kind of like a given that the Vikings defense and the Chargers offense, that's just going to be an exciting matchup. I think kind of on the other side of the ball, it's not going to be nearly as exciting. I think the Vikings have offensive line issues. They weren't nearly as bad last week as they were the week before, but there's always a couple of questions. And the Chargers defense, I love the secondary, but I think the rest of the defense maybe isn't as probably not as exciting, and probably doesn't have as many names that pop out, and so it's probably not going to be as interesting a matchup. But it's going to be probably just as important as the matchup on the other side of the ball. I kind of want to talk to you about the Chargers acquisition strategy in the secondary because it's fascinating to me. The league has emphasized, almost team by team has emphasized grabbing these long, lengthy corners and long arms who are really tall. And the Chargers and the Chiefs, in fact, there's even a player that they have between the two of them that they've shared, but the Chargers and the Chiefs have gone in the other direction where they don't really seem to care as much about cornerback height, and would rather just find a player who plays well, and they seem to get them for a little bit cheaper than everybody else. Is this something that you've noticed? Am I making stuff up, or is this something that you think the Chargers are doing really well?
No, it's a good question. I think certainly the Chargers are, and with Tom Telesco, the general manager, he did the same thing with the Colts, just Tim Jennings, for example. He drafted pretty high. Yeah. He's 5'8", 5'9". So just with Flowers and Brett specifically, I think he's just looking for guys that can make plays in space. And with what early on Pagano, the defensive coordinator, he wanted to play off coverage. So and those are just guys that fit what he wanted to do, just off and play zone, a softer zone. And then this offseason, he brought in a couple other smaller DBs like Patrick Robinson and Jimmy Wilson. Just so those are guys that can play like inside, outside, play a little safety. Just really just versatile guys. And I don't know how much it had to do with their height, but more so just being able to do multiple things on the field.
Yeah, well, certainly you were able to get them a little bit cheaper, because of the emphasis the league has on height. And Verrett fell not just because of his height, but because of his shoulder. But it looks like Flowers didn't get as much attention in free agency than I thought he would. And Robinson, I think he's a different deal. I think people were a little bit disappointed with his play in New Orleans, so maybe he was a little bit cheaper there. But it certainly allows the Chargers to focus their assets, maybe elsewhere. Do you think that that has produced maybe results for the Chargers, or is it just something that happens?
Yeah, so about going elsewhere, the thing with that is, as well as Tom Telesco has found players just for dirt cheap, you would think that, he would put in resources on the line of scrimmage, like specifically the defensive line. And since he's been here over the last 3 years, that's just not something that he's done. Like this year, they drafted an edge rusher in the 5th round and a defensive tackle in the 6th round. Off the top of my head, I can't remember last year if they did that at all. I don't think there was anybody in the trenches. So, I mean, the defensive line has definitely struggled recently, and he hasn't really done much to upgrade that. It's just been the same, veterans for the vet minimum type deals he's bringing in. So he's just bringing, it's more so of bodies than actual, spending money to get talent or investing in high draft picks to get talent on the defensive line.
And so, speaking of Patrick Robinson, he's someone that, like I mentioned, was kind of disappointing in New Orleans. How's he played out in San Diego so far?
Yeah, Robinson's been excellent, man. I believe he recovered a fumble last week. He's making plays in the running game. I don't think he's given up I think he gave up a catch. He did give up a catch last week, but he's just putting himself in position to make plays. I mean, he's a pretty big upgrade from the guys that were on the team last year. And with as much nickel as the Chargers want to run, you just need a guy that can finish and tackle, and that's just what he's done. So early on, I've been pretty impressed by him, for sure.
Cool. And then, the person I want to talk about, maybe not the most, but is maybe sort of the most intriguing, I think, from the perspective of an average football fan or even just a Vikings fan, because they were connected to him before the draft. Manti Te'o. He's someone who probably went to the right place because it was, maybe easier a little bit to avoid some of the market in San Diego than it would be, like, say, in New York. And he was considered to be a pretty good linebacker before all the other stuff kind of washed things away for him. I know he didn't play that much his rookie year, but how has he turned out this year, and how do you expect sort of his progression to go?
Yeah, so I think by now, well, first of all, funny story, like one of my best friends is a Vikings fan, and I'm sure you guys know that leading up to the draft, and probably even when they were on the clock, that the Vikings were supposed to take Te'o.
Right.
I was just giving my friends so much crap, like, wow, why would you guys take this guy? Like, there goes the Vikings being stupid again. And sure enough, karma, this is just karma for me. Now I have to deal with this for another 2 years. And we got this Manti guy, but honestly, in my opinion, he's been the exact same guy that we saw in college. So I think he's very instinctive when it comes to the passing game.
Right.
I think he's playing faster, but he's just not finishing plays. So another thing that I track is just missed tackles. And in the first 2 games this year, he's missed 10 tackles. And that just cannot happen. And it's off. And they haven't even played Adrian Peterson yet. We're talking about Gio Bernard making him look silly. The Theo Riddicks and the Amir Abdullahs, so like younger scat back guys who you'd think, even though they're very shifty, wouldn't be able to like run through tackles, but like he's getting contact and still not finishing. So,
what do you think the issue? I mean, he's 240 pounds. What do you think the issue is?
So he's just flying in out of control, and he's just not. So he's flying in out of control, coming up high on these guys. And I mean, they still have their legs, and they're just able to run out of his tackles. So I mean, against the Lions, he did make some plays, but last week was pretty rough altogether. He's just, I don't know. I was never really a fan of him, and when I talk about him, people think that it just goes back to the draft, but I just wish there was more progression. And at this time, he's a lot of the same. But I mean, at the same time, he is the best pass defender as a linebacker, and I mean, so that does say something. So he did make a nice play last week where he almost jumped a route and had an interception. So hopefully we'll see him in some coverage against Kyle Rudolph this week.
Do you think it's a good matchup for the Chargers, Teo against Rudolph?
I think Teo can certainly sit on his routes. I mean, as far as the in-breaking routes, I know, especially down in the goal line, they try to get Rudolph on a little post where he kind of fakes to the outside. That would probably give him any sort of double move would probably give him some trouble. But I wouldn't say I would rather him guard Rudolph than Eifert, for example. Like, I'd be much more comfortable in that situation.
Right. All right. Yeah. So I think you know what you're saying about the defense overall seems to sort of fit, you know, what my impression of the Chargers defense was going in, which is, you know, not necessarily awful, but certainly unimpressive in a lot of areas. And I think that that might be sort of where the edge of the game is going to be. The running game is probably going to be even more important for the Vikings in this game than it has been in the past two games, just I think because of the push that the defensive line is going to get, the issues that you mentioned, the linebackers having. Is this something that you're worried about for the Chargers, you know, playing a guy like Adrian Peterson?
Oh, it's definitely a big concern. Last week, it was basically just like Corey Liuget and everybody else. The guys on the edge, they're not wrapping up or they're not keeping contained. The linebackers aren't flowing or finishing plays. The guys up the middle are just getting blown off the ball. So I know you mentioned that, you know, the offensive line for the Vikings had some troubles too. So, you know, hopefully this is a game where they can sort of get some confidence and turn it around. I think one of the reasons that the Chargers didn't invest highly in a defensive line is because they're confident in Ricardo Matthews. I mean, that should tell you enough if you've never heard of him. But that hasn't worked out well through two games.
So, he was a 7th-round pick a while back, wasn't it?
Yep, that's it. So really it comes down to the third quote-unquote linebacker, just Eric Weddle being in a position to stop Peterson. If he's not there, nobody else can make the play.
And so Eric Weddle, one of the top safeties in the NFL, if not the top safety, his only highlight this year so far has been him being embarrassed by Amir Abdullah. Aside from that, how has he played?
He's actually played really well, man. I mean, obviously, that's not going to go well. And last week he had another play where it looked like Flowers got beat, but Weddle just kind of hung him out to dry. But he's definitely the best, like without a doubt, the best player on the defense. He makes plays that, you know, he has no business making, and he actually guarded Eifert one-on-one very well, and I was even surprised at that. He broke up a couple passes the first week 1. So he certainly is versatile, and I'm interested to see how they're going to use him. I don't know if they're going to, you know, put him on Rudolph or if they're going to just sort of leave him in the box as an extra guy for Peterson. I'm assuming the latter, but yeah, just early on this year, there has been a couple hiccups, but he's been great.
And he's 30, so he's not aging yet, but he'll get there soon. Is that, do you think, a concern, or are there any other people in the Chargers or any people in the draft you think the Chargers might target?
Well, I think that that was one of the reasons that they spent a 3rd-round pick this year on a guy from Texas State that I don't even want to talk about right now. But
the Spark superstar, right?
Yes.
Mr. Magger? Yeah.
Fast guy, yes.
Yeah.
I think he was the long-term solution there at safety. And I think they're just going to kind of slow roll him and see how that works out. But as far as looking down the line, I think they're just going to let his contract play out, and I think his age has a lot to do with not re-signing him, whether right or wrong.
Sure, I think you know, one last thing I wanted to talk about real quick with the way the Chargers defense is set up. Has there been, Denzel Perryman was one of the people that, a couple of Vikings fans wanted to draft. I don't even know if he's been on the field. Has there been maybe any anticipation? Because I know, like, even some other rookies, like Kyle Emanuel's gotten onto the field and he's even made a play or two. Has there been any anticipation, any frustration, or people patient with Perryman, or what's the deal with him?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, I mean, with the recent linebacker play, fans are certainly starting to scream for Perriman now. Mike McCoy kind of took a subtle jab at him earlier this week, he essentially said they don't trust him to be on the field. So I think that kind of explains why he's not on the field. But I mean, he's your second round pick, and with the way that the other two inside linebackers have played, I mean, soon enough, PFF has him down for playing 2 snaps this year. So.
so none. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Essentially, you have to give him a look to see if it's just something that he's doing wrong in practice or what. But yeah, they're just not giving him a shot right now.
And then talking about the Vikings offense specifically, Mike Wallace actually probably does. From the Chargers' perspective, match up well with the speed and instincts that they have in the secondary. But Charles Johnson, he's kind of a taller guy, and he might present a bigger matchup problem. Between the two receivers, though, I mean, Mike Wallace has been significantly more productive. Who, to you, is a bigger threat, knowing what you know about the Chargers' defense?
That's a good question. I would lean towards Johnson just because I think he would give you more on like a play-by-play basis. I'm imagining that Verrett's going to guard Wallace just because he has the speed to run with him, and Flowers just wouldn't stand a chance. And then Flowers would be more like the wily vet that would be able to hang with the good route running of Johnson. But I still think just the way that the Vikings attack the field, Johnson would be the bigger threat. So it'd be interesting to see how those matchups go.
Okay, and with the Vikings offense, we talked a little about Adrian Peterson. We just mentioned we just mentioned the receivers, and of course we talked about Kyle Rudolph for a little bit. What's your take on Teddy?
I think Teddy's played well, man. I was watching the games this morning. He's throwing well on the run. Obviously you know how well he is in the pocket. He's just feeling the rush. He made some really nice throws last game. I know the first game wasn't as great. But, I mean, that could have been first game. It could have been, there could have been 1,000 things. But he had a week to prepare for a team, and he looked comfortable for sure. So, I think he just looks in control. I would still just, do everything that I can to just put the pressure on him and make sure that, put the pressure on the offensive line and make him beat you still. You're not going to hang back and let Peterson get these looks.
Yeah, sure. I think, one thing that a lot of fans had questions about before the draft was, whether or not Teddy Bridgewater would be a fit in Norv Turner's offense, something that, you're pretty familiar with. And it seems like, that so far isn't a problem. Why do you think, a lot of people had concerns about his fit? Is it just myths about arm strength, or do you think that Teddy's overcome arm strength and it's normally a pretty important requirement? Like, what do you think the deal was there?
And I think it's more of, you think Norv Turner, you think 7-step. And I think when you think 7-step, you automatically think that they're going to just heave it deep. But a lot of the play action stuff that Norv does is just deep out routes or comebacks like outside of hashes. And it's all about timing. So if anybody's going to succeed in a timing offense, it's Teddy Bridgewater. So the fit actually makes a lot of sense.
Sure. That's good to hear from somebody who's a little bit more familiar with Norv Turner than us. And then quick hits on the Minnesota defense, the San Diego Chargers offense, and vice versa. We talked about specific players, but let's talk about sort of some of the bigger issues. First, the Chargers are the second worst in the NFL right now in turnovers lost with 6. What do you think the issue is for there?
I'm trying to think of where these turnovers are coming from. I know that, so there's a game-ending interception, sure. There was a fumble as well. I think it's just
here and there kind of stuff?
Yeah, it's here and there. Last week was really a sloppy game, so that probably has a lot to do with it. And then
So you don't think it's like a larger systemic issue they'd have to be worried about, like it might be with some other quarterbacks or some other running backs?
Yeah, I certainly wouldn't pin it on Phillip Rivers. I mean, sure, he tries to make plays, and he's gonna make some throws that are going to be into tight windows where it's going to be an opportunity for a turnover. But the offense honestly really doesn't. I'd be more worried about the offensive line not picking up their guys or just like getting behind the chains with holding penalties than I would be about the offense actually losing the ball.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and real quick, are you looking forward to the matchup against Matt Khalil? I mean, I know that the pass rush has been somewhat lacking, but it's better than the defensive line and probably better than the inside linebackers. So you could make some opportunities with T.J. Clemmings and Matt Khalil. He's looked a little bit better so far this season than last season, but do you think that could be a point of emphasis for the Chargers going into this week?
It certainly has to be. I mean, they have. I don't know how you or you Vikings fans in general felt about Jerry Attachu, but he's another guy that I thought was kind of overrated in the process, and he hasn't done much. He played just under like 40 snaps last week, and I don't think he did anything. But just as a speed guy, you would think that, this is an opportunity for him to do something. And then Melvin Ingram, who had a fantastic preseason, he's still the best pass rusher on the team, but he's still trying to figure out, how to be an actual football player instead of an athlete, like where it comes to like using his hands and stuff. But you are right. Like if there's one matchup where he can actually get some confidence, it would definitely be against, Khalil and the rookie Clemmings. And then Emmanuel, who I like a lot, he actually is technically sound, should be able to, I think he should be able to cross his face. The Chargers do a lot of stunts and stuff up front where hopefully they'll be at least able to confuse the offensive line.
Okay, yeah. And then real quick before I let you go, maybe you could catch some of Thursday Night Football. Do you have a score prediction?
Ooh, good call. Score prediction. So I think that the Vikings are going to score some point, like a good deal of points. I think that the Chargers will be able to move the ball. I think it's just going to come down to which team can convert touchdowns and not field goals. I think it's going to be low 20s. I don't know. I really don't know who's going to win the game. I really don't. I think it's so if the Chargers defense can keep Peterson from breaking these long runs like he had last week. Mm-hmm. And if they can just, essentially just force turnovers, that's what they're going to have to do. It's something that they're not very good at, but they're either going to have to force turnovers or just find a way to get off the field. I'm not very confident in that, so I think it's going to be 23-21 Vikings.
Wow, that's a pretty close game. I agree with you that the score is going to be relatively low as far as NFL scores go, and my thinking behind this was, last year. The Vikings and the Chargers actually had just the fewest number of drives. Not of everybody. I think Carolina Panthers were last. But they were both definitely in sort of the bottom five, and I think they're both pretty slow teams. I think Chargers waits to snap the ball because, he likes to see the field, and I think the Vikings like to play slow because they have Adrian Peterson. And because of that, because there's not going to be that many drives, and because I think that when both offenses are on the field, they're going to be relatively efficient. You're right that it's probably just going to come down to touchdowns versus field goals, but I think the score is going to still be low despite some pretty good offenses. So in a couple of other places I predicted a Vikings win, something like 24-17 or 20-17. I'm gonna stay a little bit confident and stick with 24-17 for the podcast. But he can tell me how close I am. I think a 7-point margin is going to be. I think that's big, especially considering the talent difference of the two teams. But the reason I'm picking a 7-point margin is because I think the Vikings are going to go for it because Blair Walsh is struggling, and so
really?
Yeah, and so I think they're just much more likely to ignore field goals in favor of going for it. And I think with that extra down, they're probably going to be successful. So I think the game's going to be closer than 24-17, but I think that's going to be the outcome.
That's interesting because the Chargers kicker has missed an extra point and a 47-yarder as well.
Oh, wow. Okay, so this will be an interesting game from a kicker perspective. Although better than Nick Novak, right?
Who is it?
All right. So I'll let you go unless you have. Oh, actually, I do have one mailbag question I want to ask you. Normally, the mailbag question is just for the producers and me, but I want to ask you this: better uniforms, the Chargers powder blue or the Vikings new uniforms with the purple tops, white bottoms?
Easiest question that you'll ever ask me. Chargers powder blue every time.
I actually agree with you. I think they're maybe the best uniforms I've ever seen. So
you just never see them.
You just never see them, which sucks. I love them. Well, thanks for heading on to the podcast. If you need a favor from me, just DM me, let me know. It was fun talking to you, man.
Yeah, no problem, man. I appreciate you having me on.
That is going to do it for this episode of Norse Code. Thank you again for listening. Apologies for the short episode, but we will make it up for you on Wednesday when we drop our new episode with Arif and I. If you'd like to follow us on Twitter, you can do so at NorseCodeDN. You can follow Arif at Arif Hassan NFL. You can follow Dusty at Dusty O'Connell, and you can follow myself, James, at Big Mono. I mainly end up working on the Norse Code Twitter account, so if you have any questions, comments, concerns, or just want to yell at us, please feel free. We do tend to respond to just about everything, and that includes Kyle. Not our guest here, Kyle, but of course the Kyle who writes for the Daily Norseman. So, for Dusty, Arif, myself, I would like to thank you again for listening, and our formula is this. Keep Teddy alive. We'll see you next week.
Norse Code is the official podcast of the Daily Norseman SBNation blog and is produced with cooperation from Pompous Jerk Productions. Pompous Jerk Productions. Attitude with attitude. The opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of their contributors and do not reflect official positions of the Minnesota Vikings, SBNation, the Daily Norseman staff, or PJP. No information in this podcast should be construed as gambling advice. Please obey all local gaming laws.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.